Good evening and welcome to this month's Schuman Talk, where we're discussing issues we face in Europe today in the light of Robert Schuman's vision for a community of peoples deeply rooted in Christian values. You see, it was on May the 9th, 1950 at 6 p.m. that the French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman gave a 3-minute speech in which he laid the foundations for the European house where today 500 million Europeans live together in peace and cooperation. I call that the defining moment of post-war Europe, for it launched a European movement for peace and unity that has led to today's European Union. Now, Robert Schuman was a devout believer and at one stage was seriously considering entering a monastery, but his best friend advised him to remain as a layman. He said the saints of the future would be dressed in suits. And so tonight's guest is somebody who has also chosen to be a saint in suit, as it were. His name is Eduard Heger. He was the Prime Minister of Slovakia from April 2021, May 2023. Prior to that, he was Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance of Slovakia. And so we're very privileged tonight to have Mr. Heger join us to talk about what is the role of believers in politics today. So welcome, Mr. Heger, or can I say Ed? A bit more informal. Thank you. You became Prime Minister of Slovakia in 2021 after a rather turbulent history of corruption and misrule involving your predecessors. What were you doing before you entered politics? And is there a parallel with what I've just talked about with Robert Schuman's story concerning how you entered politics?
Hello, Jeff. Thank you very much for inviting me into this interview. It's a great honor and privilege for me. Well, before I entered politics, I was an entrepreneur. I was in a business, but I was also participating in the ministry of our fellowship. It's the St. Martin's Fellowship, which I'm a member since, I would say, 2001, because don't know whether you know this, but I wasn't a believer since the child. I became a believer at the age of 23, so as an adult.
You had a communist background, is that correct?
Sorry?
You had a communist background, is that correct? Your father was a communist?
My father was a communist, and I grew up during the communist regime. And when I was 13, the communist regime fell, and then I just studied the high school and the college. But yeah, so I was growing up in a family that we didn't practice faith and Christianity. So actually, it was my schoolmate at the university who spent 2 years with me, speaking about Jesus with me, and that's why I appreciate every Christian that shares his testimony and shares his story with Jesus, with anybody, because if she wouldn't invest 2 years into me and then later on other followers of Jesus, then I wouldn't be a Christian. And sometimes it takes a really long time for someone to become a follower of Jesus and a Christian, just like in my case. But I'm very thankful. I'm very thankful for her and also others who were investing in my relationship with Jesus, because it totally transformed my life. And it helped me very much also in the politics.
What attracted you to follow Jesus?
Well, as I said, first it was just curiosity that I would speak with her about the faith for 2 years. But actually, I finished the university and I still didn't believe. But then the death of my father, very sudden death of my father, came into my life in September after I finished the university 2 months later. And I had very good relationship with my father, but he passed away while I was on a vacation in Croatia. So when I came back, I felt like I couldn't say goodbye to him. I was very disturbed. And my mom, actually, as I said, she wasn't a believer, but she knew this lady about who she known, that when she prays for somebody, then he will feel better. So she took me to this lady, and she was very kind. She gave me a book about how to speak to Jesus, prayed for me just very briefly, and then I decided, okay, I'll speak to Jesus. I'll try it, and I tried it, and I must say that I felt immediately the presence of God. I felt His presence, and I felt His interest, just like never before. And now I started to fall in love with Jesus, and I built up a relationship with Him. So that was it, and ever since I'm still in love with Jesus, and I live with Him. And later on, I became a member of a community, St. Martin's Fellowship, as I said, and I got married. I'm very happily married with my wife Lucy, and we have 4 children. And we are very thankful that we have Jesus in our life, because without Him, we probably wouldn't find each other, and definitely wouldn't have such a marriage as we have.
So you were involved in leading, if I'm correct in saying, a Catholic Charismatic community, St. Martin's, and but then somehow you got involved in politics. How did that happen?
Well, yeah, I was part of the leadership team of our community, as you say, and actually it happened through Branislav Škripek, who used to be a leader of together with Mario Tomášik, of the St. Martin's community at the time when I stepped in as a member. And Branyo decided to go into politics in 2012, became a member of parliament, and it was kind of inspiration, but it still didn't make me decide to go into politics. But then in 2014, after Branyo became the member of European Parliament in the elections, Richard Vašečka, his colleague, also a leader of a different community in Slovakia, he invited me, asked me whether I would consider to become to run in the next elections to become a member of parliament. So I said, okay, well, this is very interesting to think about it, because I haven't thought of stepping into politics before. And I said, okay, I'll speak to my wife, we'll pray, and then speak to other people to help me to discern it. And eventually I decided to run, and I became a member of parliament 2016. We didn't make it to the government. We were all in the opposition, and it was a very good training for me. I started to profile myself as a shadow minister of finance. And then in 2020, when our party won the election, I became a minister of finance. And then after 1 year, because of coalition crisis, we in Slovakia had a coalition. We always have a coalition mostly. So this was very challenging time because of COVID, etc. So the leader of our party stepped down from the office of prime minister, and there was an agreement that I should become the prime minister in his place. So in April 21, I became the prime minister in this coalition.
Now, that's a big jump from leading a Christian community like that to going into politics. If you were going to go into the church, you would go to a theological seminary and have years of preparation. How do you get prepared for political engagement as a Christian? Were you familiar with Catholic social teaching, for example? How did you get ready for this job?
Well, that's a very good question, and I speak very often with, especially with young people. And what I like to say and tell them, that in politics you always utilize everything what you learned in your life. We say in Slovakia, what you learn when you're young, it's like you found it when you're older. So it's similar in the politics. And any experience you gain, you then can use in the politics, because you represent the people, and you better understand the issues and the problems that the problem go through, and that's why you can bring solutions to it. And when you're asking about some studies or some information and formation that I received, well, I was part and still am part of the community, so we were discussing several topics on this issue, and then you have friends around. But in general, what I think and what I see is very important. First, in Slovakia, it was very important. There was several areas that Slovakia neglected, or the governments before us neglected very much, and the victory in the elections also came because the previous government was very corrupt, and it was corrupt to a level that they felt they are so they became so arrogant that they allowed the system that a journalist was killed with his fiancée because he was writing about the affairs of the government. So it just shows you how far the government went in the arrogant way of leading the country, and how corrupt it was. And so we knew that there's several areas that we have to immediately act on, but also areas like healthcare, social system, and others, investments into innovations, and other reforms that we had to do as a government. And since the COVID started, all the countries decided together that they will prepare the recovery plan, and a part of this recovery plan that you get money from the EU if you do the reforms. So it's kind of hand in hand. So we were preparing these reforms and planned also the investments. And then in Slovakia, the Ministry of Finance was in charge. So I was in charge of preparing this recovery plan that later on, when I became Prime Minister, I was in charge of execution of this recovery plan. And I'm glad that together with a broad team, we were able to prepare a very robust recovery plan that was also evaluated at the level of European Union and the European Commission. One of the most ambitious and one of the best recovery plans, and it was also we submitted it quite early among the first 5 countries, and we were executing, meeting all the milestones very quickly. So we were one of the first 5 countries within the whole EU who were able to meet all the milestones in the time till now.
So what you've described is politics with a very dirty background. What do you say to Christians who say that's not an area that Christians should be involved? It's too dirty.
Absolutely, the opposite is true, because it's like with the darkness and the light. And if we believe that we're bringing the light of Jesus, the light of Holy Spirit, then definitely we need to step into place that are either dirty or dark, as we say, because who else will bring the light in those places? And since we believe that Jesus is transforming us into his picture, as we say, so it's even more important that the Christians step out. And as I said, if there wouldn't be Christians in my life, I would be most likely still not believer, and my life would look totally different. And the blessing came through the Christians who walked up to me and weren't considering me dirty, but actually knew that they need to share the gospel with me for my own good. And I'm thankful for this. So, and the same thing goes for politics. Actually, you have to realize that politics is not about ruling, but it's about ministry. It's about serving people, representing the people, and bringing the solutions that are good for the whole country, for the whole nation. So you need to have this servant attitude, approach, servant spirit, if you want to fully meet the call of politics. And that's why it's so important that the Christians step into the politics, because, as I said, they are not seeking their own will, they're seeking God's will, and we know that the God's will is the best for people, because God is loving. So and they also need to work on being wise and well educated and professional in the areas that they then minister in politics, so they can bring good solutions. But the character is very important, and in this, the Christians are those who I would say mature their character in the communities through reading the Bible, through listening, discerning, and obeying God's will. So therefore, I think Christians are actually very needed in the politics. And if we want to get the dirt out of the politics, which we should and we need to, then you need to bring people with clean intentions. And Christians definitely who follow Jesus and love him definitely are like that.
So the fact that politics is a dirty business is the very reason Christians should be involved in doing something about it. And you're reminding us that the term prime minister means first servant. And yes, Now, how does your faith actually integrate with your political life? Is it like a cherry on the cake, or is it the yeast that affects the whole loaf? How do you see that?
Well, definitely, it's the yeast that affects the loaf, and it's. They asked me like whether I had time to pray while I was prime minister. Well, these kind of positions of responsibility that you pray actually much more often because there is so many decisions that you must take, and you want to do it wisely. So you speak to many people, but you also pray to God that He gives you the wisdom and helps you to do the right decision. So that's the call. And one more thing about the Christians, sometimes here in Slovakia, the non-believers think that Christians are considered saint because they don't do any sin or they don't do any mistake, which is not true. The reason why we follow Jesus is because He's our Savior, not just because we are so good. And we're actually the opposite. We are humble that we know we are not good, and we ask Him to help us to grow in our faith, in our character, in our skills, and everything. So it's being humble. It represents Christians much more as being some perfect person or so, because we know we are not. So and that's so important in the politics to bring also this approach of I would say admitting that we are not perfect, but we are looking for the best solutions, and for that you need to speak to other people. So it's the networking, it's the connecting of the people, because many times the dirt of the politics is that you split the people, you bring conflict, etc. But actually, what I think, the people work either in the natural level or they can step into the divine level, and the divine level is that's what Jesus introduced, where we had and we're known that when conflict is, there's as we say, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. But Jesus came and said, well, forgiveness is the answer.
Politics begins with our understanding of who the human being is. And if we understand the human being to be created in the image of God, that will affect our understanding of his and her dignity and sanctity and value. And all of politics will follow from that. But does being a Christian politician make you more conservative or progressive?
Yes, these two terms are very often used these days, but it depends what kind of definition of progressive or conservative do you use. Because I think with growing in the faith, there must be a progress. So it's important to keep progressing in everything what we do, because it shows that we have better skills and we move forward. But of course, we have to speak of the values that we live, and not just speak of them, but we have to show it with the action. Because these days, I think many people watch whether, especially in the lives of politicians, whether the politicians do what they say. And we know that with the growth of populism, there is all more and more disconnect between the action and the words of the politicians. Politicians often promise much more that they can deliver, and the populists, they usually promise even knowing that they will not deliver, because they just want to get the votes, and then they just come up with a different lie. So yeah, it's very important to work on our action. And in this perspective, I don't think, actually what I see then when we get into the discussion about the progressive and the conservative, it's actually only polarizing the society in general. So we should speak more about the substance and not putting it into certain categories. Because if you ask and you speak about the people whether there should be the government should to do more about for the families, I don't think there will be an argument about it, because everybody of us grows up in a family and wants to have a better education for our children, wants to have a better healthcare, etc. So we can unite. But if you start to say, well, I'm for progressive or conservative education, well, there is so much definitions these days of these two terms that it's misleading. So therefore, let's speak on the values that we want to be present in our lives. And I'm sure that as human beings, sacrifice is something that it's not easy to live, but at the end of the day, everybody appreciates when somebody sacrifices for him, either in small things or big. And the same thing with value as love, peace, etc. I could move on. So
Yeah.
we should not put it into a category whether this is a conservative or Christian value or progressive, but let's speak of the objectives and the values that we want to live.
Well, the question of values is something I want to come back to you on, because there seems to be a tension between uh, particularly the East and the West as to what European values are. But before we do that, can we go to February the 23rd last year, 2022? And that was when we woke up to Putin's invasion, or so-called special military operation, where he expected to take over Ukraine and pull it back into the Russian orbit, and realize his plan for risky Mir, for kind of a Russian imperialism. What was your reaction at the time, and how did you get involved?
Well, I was a prime minister, but
Well, that, see behind you, there's a flag, the Ukrainian flag behind you, correct?
yes, I received this as a gift from the Ukrainian friends because they were very thankful for our approach in helping Ukraine. But you have to understand, I mean, Ukraine is our direct neighbor, and for every prime minister, I think, and for every country, is good when they have neighbors who are stable and prosperous, democratic and free countries, because then your country can develop in the best manner as well. So when we saw that Ukraine has been brutally attacked with the bombing, as it was on the 24th in the morning, we immediately said we must help them. So we of course helped them in the humanitarian way, where the mothers with the children were fleeing from the battlefield, coming of course to Slovakia, Poland, Hungary, the neighboring countries. I'm very thankful to the citizens of Slovakia who opened their homes and were helping. But at the same time, we knew that we have to help them with any military help, because they need to defend themselves. And it's in our highest interest that Ukraine will be able to defend itself, will be able to win in this war, because then it will remain as a free and democratic country. And it makes total difference if we're going to have Russian tanks on our eastern border and not democratic and free Ukraine. It has economic effect, it has military effect on Slovakia, and I could move on. So therefore, we're helping immediately. We were basically the first country that provided the air defense system, the S-300. So, and until today's day, when I meet Ukrainian people, they are very thankful, and they tell me this system is helping thousands of innocent lives of the civilians, because yeah, the Russians, they bomb even civilians, they bomb hospitals, they bomb apartment buildings, etc. So it's good that they have this and other countries to follow with air defense system. And we were also the country that provided our MiG-29s as one of the first countries, coordinated with others, and now other countries to follow with providing F-16s, etc. On the other hand, we weren't able to use those MiG-29s anymore, because a couple of years ago, the previous government decided they will buy F-16s. So these were already shut down and actually was operated by Russian soldiers. So we had to shut down everything. And that's why it's useful for Ukraine to protect their people and protect their territory.
So you met with President Zelensky. I think we have a photo of that as well. Tell us about that meeting.
Yes, this was short after the war started, and I went there together with Ursula von der Leyen to meet with President Zelensky, and we went to see Bucha right after there was this massacre of the Russian soldiers in Bucha, which was very sad. Actually, I have you can see it right behind me right now. There is a picture where I was in Bucha, and we were on the streets where there was this big fight between the militaries, and yeah, it was so sad. I mean, it was so touching. Yeah, these are the pictures that when we were in Bucha, and it was so sad and so touching because the misery of the war you could see in the streets, and we could see the bombed and shot houses, and we walked on the street where you could. There were in the media the pictures how they shot an old man going on a bicycle home, and they shot him at the place. So it was really, you could see the misery of the war, and once you see it, it's so transforming. And that's why I was so sad that so many disinformation was on the social platforms and in the air. That's why it's so important to always check the sources and really fight against and step up against the disinformation that are being shared on the social platforms. Because once you go on that place and you see the reality, it doesn't let you just as you came. It's very transforming. So that's why I was so glad that we could encourage the President Zelensky, because as you remember, they wanted to assassinate him, and he could leave the country and be a government in exile, but he decided to stay, even though he's father of 2 children and a while having a wife. They all stayed in Ukraine and fighting together with the nation against this terror that they're experiencing. Yeah, this is a picture that you can see now. It was at the border, eastern border, when Joe Biden came to visit Slovakia, and she actually from the border went to Uzhhorod, which is a city right at the border on the Ukrainian side. And you could see also the nonprofit organization that were helping us on the border. And I'm very thankful for the organization and how people join the forces together to help the innocent victims.
Now, Ed, your job has been taken over by a predecessor of yours who twice held the position of being Prime Minister, Robert Fico, who's a pro-Kremlin politician. And he vowed during his election campaign that he would not send another bullet to help Ukraine fend off the Russian invasion. What led him to say that?
Well, it's very important to see what was happening in Slovakia during the last 2-3 years, because I think this can be a good lesson for other countries as well. As you said, Robert Fico was prime minister. Actually, he was 3-time prime minister before me. And the phenomenon in Slovakia was that a former 3-time prime minister was actually the biggest promoter of the Russian propaganda in Slovakia. And you see that the Russian propaganda in other countries has its own speakers, but you don't see it in any country that a former 3-time prime minister would be the biggest speaker of these messages of Kremlin. And that's why it's so, the politicians, they have some credit, especially if they're in the position of prime minister several times. And if they abuse this credit that they have among the people for their own benefit, and they start to abuse it the way that they start to share the propaganda and the disinformation, then the outcome is that the whole atmosphere in country changes. So that's why it's so important to make steps to prevent that the disinformation will be shared as it is right now. And I'm not speaking about any censorship or so, not at all. But there is a difference between freedom of speech and freedom of lies. And we should be really we should have this very strongly in mind and consider how to prevent the lies to spread in such an extent as it is now on the social platforms. So yeah, he became a prime minister again because he won the election through surfing on the disinformation, on the propaganda, and causing fear in people. And he's a regular populist politician where he's causing the fear, but then the fear doesn't happen. When just couple days before the war started, he says the Russians will never, never, ever attack anybody, nor Ukraine. 2, 3 days later, the Russians invaded Ukraine. But he never said, "Oh, I apologize. I'm sorry. I was wrong." No, he never. He actually said that the American soldiers will come to Slovakia and will rape Slovak women. Nothing of that happened, of course. He said that Slovakia will have nuclear weapons, but by this time present on our territory, which again is total lie. But this is how he operates with the lies, and he never says, "I'm sorry, I was wrong," because this is the way that the populists work with. But it's very important that we find a way how to fight against this disinformation.
Well, here in the Netherlands, the party leader with the most votes in the recent elections also wants to stop support to the Ukraine. Do you fear a trend to the extreme right in Europe?
Absolutely, and you see it, but it's because just you have to understand that Vladimir Putin knows that the unity that was among the European countries, the members of European Union, right after he invaded Ukraine, was very strong, and this is much bigger, I would say, power against him that he knows that he cannot defeat. So he must destabilize the countries, and he's working on in each country to destabilize. And this, we could call this as a hybrid warfare, that he's trying to help the parties that are anti-Ukraine to grow in their support. In Slovakia, actually, we had a case where the police called a reporter of one alternative media how he was taking a bribe from a Russian agent. So you see how what kind of activities they do in order to break the unity within the European Union and to get more politicians, to help more politicians in power who will support rather Kremlin and not Ukraine, who is just defending themselves. So this is what we see. But therefore, again, it's so important that now again the Christians will step into politics, because Christians are the people who can bring the approach of forgiveness, of reconciliation, but can be bold at the same time. And we just have to. I mean, this is so needed for the times coming.
Yes, which highlights what we were talking about before, is that there are various reasons why Christians have not been very well prepared to engage, and it's something that we're trying to do in the Schuman Center, is to provide training opportunities for people to serve in the public square. But let's come back to this question about values, which you touched on before. Can you comment on the tension that there is among EU member states on what exactly are European values? Western members of the EU tend to see themselves as liberal and progressive, and the East as conservative. And very often Brussels, people from Brussels say, well, you need to accept these European values in order to receive this financial support. And people from the center and the West and the East, rather, can say, well, wait a minute, we are just as European as you are, but these are not necessarily our values. Did you experience that yourself as a prime minister, being manipulated to accept liberal values in exchange for EU's financial support?
No, I haven't experienced it, and actually, I don't think this is actually happening, because I was on many European councils and I never saw a debate that it would be said as you described it. So, and I know that this is opinion that is kind of floating around, but again, the prime ministers at the European Council and also on different levels, they seeking the solutions, the best solutions for each country. Of course, there's a lot of debate about it or around it, and then there is a lot of, I would say, gossip or a lot of theories, what's going on, etc. Of course, some countries don't follow the basic principles on keeping the rule of law or other principles that we have. And of course, the politicians are very good at creating their own interpretations. So I think there would be it would be fair if we would have a genuine debate on what values do we as a European Union we consider are the most important, and what is the meaning of those values. Yes, there could be, but at the same time, I think the spending of the funds is rather used, that is meant for really bringing a higher quality of life. And in the politics, of course, you get into debates, and it would be probably for a different debate or a discussion that we could have, because this would be good to elaborate, because if you narrow it down to certain thoughts, it could be misleading. So, in general, I wouldn't go into a definition that if you don't accept any values, you don't get money from EU. I think this is misleading, and actually, again, this is very polarizing, and it's actually causing the anger toward European Union. And there is a lot of there are politicians who are trying to cause anger toward Brussels. But I go like, what do you mean Brussels? Brussels is just city where the prime ministers meet and make the agreement. So it's there, and it's always it must be 100% consensus, because otherwise the agreement isn't made at the level of prime ministers. So if something is agreed, that means that each prime minister agreed on that. It's not that some person from Brussels dictated to the prime ministers to approve it. No, that doesn't happen. So it's either that the prime ministers approve something in Brussels and then go home and say something else, which is then hypocrisy, or it's a solution that doesn't go through. So I think we need to be fair in the debate, and also in how do we speak to our citizens. And we see that this is a great disconnect these days, especially among the populist politicians. So we should speak more about what does it mean, the populism, why the populist politicians lie to their own voters, and we should be better in pointing out the action that the politicians actually do, and therefore not to jump into very narrow conclusions that could be misleading.
What do you understand to be feeding this the populism and the nationalism that is really trying to erode European unity?
As you said, erode European unity. That's kind of the objective. There's this famous sentence that divide and rule, right? So, but we know, again, as a Christian, we know that God is creating and building unity. And unity doesn't mean what we were taught during the communism time, that we all have the same opinion. Mm-hmm. Unity means that even though we have different opinions, we can agree on certain decisions. And yes, during the communism time, we were brought up that we have to have the one and only and the same opinion, which is totally against human beings, because we are so much different in individuals that it's okay if we have different opinions. And the opinion is built up with the information that I receive. So if I get more information, I actually am changing my opinion. So that's why the debate and the discussion is so important. And also in Slovakia, what I see very often, that people, when they find out that you have a different opinion as I, in certain area, the people immediately start to feel that you are my enemy, which is totally not true. I mean, you are not my enemy just because you have another opinion. And I should be learning more and trying to understand why you have such opinion. So if this kind of information exchange happens, then there is no conflict, then there is no fear, and we can enrich each other. So that's why we have to learn how to lead the whole discussion and debate, even having different opinions, and not push each other that we have to have the same opinion, but look what we can agree on, despite our different opinions. And that's why we have the freedom. That's the good thing about democracy and the freedom, that we can discuss. We don't have to push anybody to have different opinion, and learn how to respect each other and enrich each other. That's, I think, the most important. And then if we go this way, then we should not be afraid or worried of any conflicts. But as we started this question, there are people who don't like this, because then they lose power. Of course, if you keep, as a politician, if you keep certain group of people mobilized through fear and through certain opinion, then you have much more influence on them. And mostly the politicians who look for power and not a ministry, they will be those that will try to manipulate people into having the same opinion and preventing them to search for new information that could enrich them. Because once they lose this one opinion, then they lose the tool to manipulate the people. So freedom is actually very good, and we know it's given by God.
So you have had to travel quite often to Brussels in your political capacity. Has your opinion about the EU changed since before you entered politics and until now, after all this experience you've had with Brussels?
Actually, my experience as a prime minister in Brussels was very positive, because, as I say, you can build up a great unity without losing any competence or authority or responsibility. And we, as a prime ministers, had to look for a lot of unity during the war in Ukraine, developing different sanction packages and making a lot of decisions, but also during the COVID. And I saw many prime ministers that said, well, I came with this kind of, wouldn't say opinion, but with this kind of proposal to this table of 27 ministers, prime ministers. But for the sake of unity, I give up on my own priorities, but I do it because I want to achieve the priorities of the whole European Union. And I think if we want to succeed, and do you hear me now?
Yeah, fine. Keep going.
So if we want to build a place that will be safe and secure for all of us, then we have to build it on the level of unity. And if we keep this level of unity, then we can have all the authorities that we have and the rights. There needs to be honest debate, of course, about the solutions, and then we don't have to push anybody to kind of give up their own priorities. It's just a matter on how do we come to the decisions. So and that goes through the fair debate, just like we did it. And that's why my experience was during the war in Ukraine and COVID, that the European Union can be actually very flexible and can be very fast. Because what I was saying, that before the COVID, the European Union, it took at the European Council, the Commission took years sometimes to get to some decision. During the COVID, it was month, and it was month, but during the war in Ukraine, it took weeks or days, and sometimes hours. So it's doable, it's feasible, we see it. But again, it shows also that there must be a good cause.
The common good is obviously the value that's at the core of the EU. However, we're seeing several examples of those who are no longer interested in seeking the common good, and that's a task indeed to of the overall leadership to maintain that focus on the common good. Let me just mention here, you were this week in Brussels for the European Parliament prayer breakfast, where you were the keynote speaker. There were two seminars after that. Did you attend either of them at all?
Yes, I did. I was part of the Demography. That was a very good debate, but also about the situation in Israel, and I was also part of that. Yeah.
The one on demography, that was really about the real need for Europe to address its falling birth rate. Migration is only one part of the answer to that, and of course there's a lot of resistance to that as well. But really, it's the attitude towards families and the very progressive lifestyle that stresses the freedom of the individual rather than the commitment to family and thus children is eroding. And Hungary was held up as a great example of the family, and yet that seems to be conflicting with other areas of social freedoms and press freedoms and political freedoms, so on, in that country. That seems to be a strange mixture. Can you comment on that?
Well, again, I think we don't need to use countries as a role models, because if we agree that having family is a good thing for a human being, then it doesn't matter who does it, and it's good. Because even a human being, I do some things very good and some things I don't do that good. So let's look rather at the action that the general picture of some country or some human beings. But what I want to say here, what we see, especially with the digital age, the society becomes more and more anonymous. People spend much more time on the social platforms as they spend in the relations, and we see it's kind of seductive on one hand, but on the other hand, it's not helping us. Actually, it's causing us a lot of problems, and we see how many mental problems people go through, and it's growing issue not just in Slovakia but worldwide, I would say. And I think it's because we didn't address correct way yet how to deal with the digital age we are in. We have a physical world, now we have the digital world. We are in the midst of it, but we don't know how to deal with it. Mm-hmm. When I see, and it's, in Slovakia, we were laughing that many times the young people are still on the cell phone. If you want to speak to them, you need to call them, or you need to send a video so they can watch you, because they wouldn't really raise their eyes to look at you. But if you send them a text message, then they will read it. So, but this is happening also to older people. It's not just the phenomenon of the young people. So therefore, I think we need to realize this change and address it in a proper way. And if we are able to realize how important it is to have physical relationships between, then the role of the family starts to grow. And also the being selfless, like selfish. Now, back in the past, this was something negative. Now sometimes it's considered like of a comfort, etc. So I think, and many psychologists now start to speak about it, how this has a negative effect on the populations. So I think we need to go back to the roots and speak. Why is it important for a human being to have a healthy relationships, physical relationship with neighbors, with friends, with children? I mean, look how the generational exchange, we kind of lost it. So this is, again, a great debate that we should have, and we should go back to it and see that not everything you can make up with technology, because from an instant perspective, short-time perspective, it could be helpful, but from a long-term perspective, this could actually harm your life. So and then learn how to invest into the sustainable. This is a very modern word now, sustainable way of living. And I think a family is definitely a sustainable aspect of life of every human being, of every creature. So that's why we have to also be able to explain it in a relevant language to the people of today's age.
Yes, sustainability is definitely a high value these days in almost every area. Unfortunately, except for relationships where we're just swapping partners and going after your own exclusive individualism is very much part of the scene for a large number of people, for example, who live in the city where I live, in Amsterdam, and who would not necessarily echo what you were saying earlier about, well, everybody recognizes the value of families, because all the new definitions of what a family is, there's been a lot of attacking of the bourgeois view of family, and And yet, I think more and more, as was being said at that seminar on demography, more and more studies are really showing this is where people are the happiest, in stable relationships and with children. Now, on Wednesday, when you were addressing the European prayer breakfast, you had a tough act to follow, because there was a very dramatic, shall we say, and emotion-filled presentation about the Gaza situation. There was the head of the Bethlehem Bible College sharing, a Palestinian Christian. There was a member of the Knesset, and there was the brother of a young man who's still being held hostage by Hamas. How should Christians respond to this conflict?
Well, again, I think first thing we need to think as a Christians is that there's always a call to action. Because sometimes we kind of stop at the level of discussing things, but forget that we are called to be active, to do something. And I, as a person who wasn't a believer and became believer at the age of 23 as an adult, I have very strongly in mind the words, the last words that Jesus told to his disciples, because before he left them to heaven, and he said, "Go to the whole world and share the gospel and make disciples." So that was the call, and this is what we see, that there is a lot of activity, that we are the salt, as we say, we are the yeast. And yeast, we know that this is to make activity through activity to transform. So our calling is to bring transformation. Our calling is to bring positive change, and it's not through our strength and through our being perfect, but it's actually through our submission to Jesus and His Spirit, because He's bringing the divine level of our living. So we just need to be willing. That's all. We just need to be willing. Sometimes we forget about it and we say, "I'm not either worthy enough," or we have a lot of excuses why not to be willing, why not to be active. So let's step into be willing, and then Lord, I'm sure, will, through our wisdom and through our experience, through our education, bring the solutions. But the first place will change the atmosphere. Sometimes you need to first change the atmosphere in order to bring a solution. Because if you bring the right solution into a wrong atmosphere, it will not be taken. It will be not received. So our first calling, I think, is to bring a different attitude to the places where we are, either in the relationship with the neighbors, with our colleagues, or at the political level between really very serious diplomatic negotiations. First of all, we should never give up. And second of all, that there was many examples where a person with a different attitude came in, started to say something which is different, it's new, but it was so important to say at the moment. So in this perspective, again, reconciliation is something that we carry. Forgiveness, it's something that we carry, and it's helping in the most situation where the conflict is, and there's many conflicts around the world. And first, you need to start to step into the communication. That's very important. But this is very generally said, but I think we can practice it every day on individual level up to the very global level.
Well, where we began this discussion tonight was with the story of Robert Schuman, which illustrates what you were saying, how that faithful individuals and faithful minorities can make a huge difference. We tend to forget that it was one thing to win the war in 1945, but the 5 years that followed were very fearful, uncertain years, where Europe was really experiencing a severe case of post-trauma stress disorder. And it was with the reconciliation and the forgiveness between the French and the Germans, epitomized by Schuman and Adenauer, for example, that's where a whole new beginning came. And when you think, as you just mentioned about, well, Jesus gave these this instructions to go and disciple the nations to his disciples on Ascension Day. 11 rather scared disciples. Jesus was entrusting that whole task to them, and it's become a global movement now, embracing the whole world. That gives us faith that yes, he can use every one of us. What last word would you like to say to a young person who is trying to seek God's will for his life? Where can I best serve? Is it to become a clergy, or is it to be a saint in a suit?
Well, I would say that first place, pray. Pray to the Lord and ask him to show you. Second, very important thing, don't stay alone in it. Don't try to discern it by yourself. You have definitely all the people around you who have experience in walking with God, and will help you to discern your own decision, and will guide you to help you to find the right decision. So this is basically the very important start. Start with God, start with Jesus, and second, follow with his servants to help you and guide you through this process. And I'm sure you will find the calling, because we need people on both fields. We need people who need to be the shepherds of the Lord among us, but we very much need the professionals, the saints in the suits, especially these days in the state administration, in the politics. And I know what I'm speaking about, because these people have strong influence, and it's very important that they have a build-up character, that they have a build-up personality that can resist the pressure, that can always bring the good of all the people, and not just for small group or individual. And this is the way we can transform. So, and be bold. I would definitely say be bold. Don't be afraid of your own failures. Failures are the way to growth. So they are needed. They are definitely there. And to me, this is a great example is Joseph, the son of Jacob. He went through a lot of endings and beginnings, but there is other people's stories, either in the Bible or around you, around us, that we can see that mistakes, if we learn from them, help us to be smarter, wiser, and more resistant. So this would be my recommendation. Just go, follow Jesus, don't be afraid, and never give up.
Thank you, Ed, very much for sharing so openly and transparently your own experience. We have just been talking about Ascension Day, which happens this next year to fall on Europe Day, May the 9th. It's a Thursday, and we are going to offer in Brussels, which is going to be the capital of the country with the presidency of the EU for the next 6 months. We're going to offer a masterclass on Europe Day, Ascension Day, focusing on these words to go and disciple the nations, as we look at how the Christian faith has helped shape Europe and also catalyze the beginning of the process of European integration. And that will be immediately followed by the State of Europe Forum, beginning the next day, where we bring together Christians from different backgrounds to look at the current state of Europe in the light of Robert Schuman's vision for Europe to become a community of peoples deeply rooted in Christian values. And may the Lord give us the grace to see a real army of saints in suits, prepared to step out in the footsteps of Robert Schuman or Eduard Heger, to help disciple the nations towards the values of the kingdom of God. So thank you very much, Ed, for being with us, and we can look forward to joining the listeners again next month on January the 9th.
Thank you very much for the invitation. All the best. God bless you. Thank you.